The house had never felt so silent. After the sudden death of Eleanor Whitmore, the beloved wife of billionaire Charles Whitmore, every corridor of the mansion seemed to echo with a grief so heavy it was almost physical. It had not even been 20 days since the tragedy, and although Charles tried to maintain a semblance of control, his only son, 17-year-old Lucas, was falling apart quietly in places no one could see. They had all been swallowed by a quiet misery, one that lingered in unspoken words, untouched rooms, and memories that clung to the walls like dust. On that cold morning, Charles walked through the marble foyer with that same exhausted posture he'd worn since the funeral. The household staff moved cautiously, as if any loud sound might shatter what was left of the fragile family. Lucas barely left his room anymore. The once rebellious, sharp-tongued boy had withdrawn into himself, drifting through the house like a shadow. They all knew grief changes a person. But whatever was happening to Lucas felt heavier, deeper, and far more unsettling than typical sorrow. Something in him had cracked open the day he saw his mother's coffin descend into the ground. The mansion's lead housekeeper, Mrs. Graham, had insisted that the family needed additional help, someone who could take over the routine chores while she managed the rest of the staff. Charles, though reluctant to allow new faces into his home so soon, eventually agreed. And so, the agency sent someone young, quiet, efficient, they promised. A temporary cleaner. Someone who would blend into the background, causing no disruption. But when she arrived, nothing about her blended in. Her name was Ava. She stepped into the mansion with a soft expression, dressed simply, her dark hair tied loosely as if she hadn't slept much. There was something almost fragile about her, yet her eyes held a stillness that made Mrs. Graham pause for the briefest moment, though she could not explain why. Ava introduced herself politely, her voice calm, her movements delicate, and the staff accepted her presence without question. But from the second she crossed the threshold, the atmosphere in the home shifted in a way no one could quite name. Lucas first noticed her through the railing of the upstairs corridor. He didn't know why he was even watching. He hated people, hated noise, hated the world lately. Yet there was something quietly magnetic about this new cleaner. She moved with an unusual grace, her footsteps light, as though she were careful not to disturb anything or anyone. And for the first time since the funeral, Lucas felt something other than numbness. Not interest, not attraction. Something simpler, something he hadn't felt since his mother lived. A strange sense of calm. Ava didn't look up at him, didn't search for attention, didn't attempt to comfort him. She simply worked, cleaning the dust from the banister, wiping windows that didn't need wiping, straightening objects that were already straight. And yet Lucas felt as if she were quietly rearranging something inside him. No one could explain it, but the moment she stepped into that house, the air grew different. Not lighter, not darker, just charged, as if the story of their lives had been following one path, only for Ava's arrival to quietly take that path in a completely different direction. Charles noticed it too, though he refused to acknowledge it aloud. It was as if a new energy flowed through the home. Still, subtle, but undeniable. Something was shifting, just beneath the surface, quietly, powerfully, inevitably. And none of them had the slightest idea that Ava's presence in the mansion was not accidental at all. The following days unfolded slowly, as if time itself were reluctant to move forward in the Whitmore mansion. Ava settled into her duties without complaint, appearing each morning before the sun fully rose, and leaving only after the final room had been cleaned to her quiet standards. She barely spoke unless spoken to, yet somehow her silence felt less like shyness and more like an intentional, careful choice. The staff had begun to comment, softly, when she was not within earshot, that the house seemed almost calmer when she moved through it. Mrs. Graham, who rarely approved of new hires, found herself begrudgingly impressed by the girl's discipline. But while Ava did not seek attention, attention found her, particularly from Lucas. He watched her far more than he admitted to himself. In the beginning it was accidental, a passing glance whenever she walked into a room. But soon it became something else. He found reasons to be where she was, lingering in the kitchen longer than necessary when she wiped the counters, sitting on the staircase during the mornings. She polished the banister, pretending to be asleep on the couch, simply to listen to her soft footsteps moving around him. There was something strangely familiar about her presence, something that drew him in, even though he didn't fully understand why. She reminded him of the quiet moments he used to share with his mother, moments when words weren't needed, when a sense of comfort simply existed. But this comfort was mixed with a sharp curiosity he'd never felt before. Ava was not just quiet. She was contained, as if guarding thoughts she refused to let slip. And then the first strange thing happened. Lucas woke one morning from a nightmare, one of the many that had haunted him since the funeral. But this one felt different. In it, he saw a woman standing in the corner of his room, her face blurred, her posture tense, as if she were watching over him or warning him of something he couldn't decipher. He jolted awake, breathless, sweat-soaked. For a moment he thought he truly saw someone near his window, but the room was empty. He pressed his palms to his eyes, trying to chase away the sensation that the dream had not been just a dream. And then he noticed something else. His blanket had been pulled up neatly to his shoulders. He never slept like that. Lucas walked downstairs later that morning and found Ava quietly sweeping the dining room floor. He hesitated near the doorway, unsure whether he was imagining things, but she looked up at him, and for a fleeting moment, he saw something in her eyes. Recognition, or was it concern? He couldn't name the feeling, but it unsettled him deeply. Ava nodded politely and continued cleaning, as if nothing unusual had occurred. But Lucas's heart wouldn't settle. He wanted to ask her if she'd been in his room, if she'd checked on him, if she somehow knew about the nightmare he couldn't shake. But he didn't. Something inside him told him that asking would break whatever fragile thread existed between them. Meanwhile, Charles Whitmore had begun noticing details too. Not about Ava specifically, but about the unsettling undercurrents running through the mansion. Papers on his office desk rearranged themselves overnight. A door he knew he had locked appeared slightly open in the morning. A framed picture of Eleanor kept shifting a few inches to the side. He brushed it off at first. Grief does strange things, after all. But as the days passed, the incidents multiplied in ways he could no longer casually dismiss. One evening, he walked into the living room to find Lucas sitting alone in the dark, eyes fixed on the fireplace, as though waiting for something to emerge from within the flames. Charles approached quietly and asked if his son was all right. Lucas didn't look away from the fire when he answered. "She's different, Dad." "Who?" Charles asked, even though he already knew. "The new cleaner, Ava. I don't know." Lucas finally turned toward him. "It feels like she knows things. About us. About Mom." Charles stiffened. He wanted to correct Lucas, dismiss the notion, remind him that grief made the mind imagine connections that weren't real. But the truth was, he'd been feeling something similar, something he didn't dare put into words. The house felt watched, not by one person, but by the past. Ava worked nearby that night, quietly dusting the hall outside the living room. She heard every word, though she made sure her expression didn't change. Her hands trembled only slightly as she wiped down the wooden frame of a painting. She hadn't expected them to notice. Not so soon. Not when she still had so much left to do. What she carried with her was not meant to be uncovered yet. Not until the final moment. Not until the truth could no longer be avoided. Lucas continued to observe her in the days that followed. But now, instead of simple curiosity, he felt a strange pull, as if he were walking toward something inevitable, something that would change everything he knew about his family, his mother's death, and himself. Ava, however, remained a mystery, calm, composed, but undeniably hiding something. And the truth, the whole truth, was far darker, far deeper, and far more intertwined with the Whitmore family than any of them were prepared to discover. The third week after Ava's arrival marked the beginning of changes no one in the mansion could deny anymore. Everything that had once felt predictable inside the Whitmore estate, every polished surface, every echoing hallway, every quiet morning routine, was subtly shifting. Yet the most noticeable change was not in the house itself, but in the people living within it. Lucas was the clearest sign of that shift. He had begun leaving his room more often, wandering through the halls with a sense of purpose, though he wouldn't have been able to explain what that purpose was. Something pulled him, as steady as a heartbeat, as persistent as breathing, toward Ava. She became a kind of lighthouse in the fog that had consumed him since the funeral. He didn't fully understand it, and part of him feared it, but every time he saw her, he felt that strange inner tightening, like a knot pulling itself into shape. One afternoon, Lucas walked into the sunroom where Ava was cleaning the glass panes. The warm light spilled onto her face, softening her features in a way that made her look almost unreal. For a long moment he simply watched her, standing frozen at the doorway. She sensed him before he spoke. "You don't have to pretend you're not there," she said without turning around. Lucas startled. "How did you—" Ava finally turned, her expression impossibly calm. "You step lightly, but the floorboards near the doorway always creak." It was a reasonable explanation, yet something in her tone made Lucas feel as though she had known he was there long before he stepped onto the creaky boards. He approached slowly, unsure of why words felt harder to form around her. "I've seen you a lot lately," he said quietly. "I work here," she replied, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips, an expression so rare on her face that Lucas felt a flicker of warmth in his chest. "No, I mean—" He looked away, embarrassed. "I see you even when you're not looking at me. You're different from the others." She didn't react immediately. Instead, she placed the cloth she had been using on the windowsill and faced him fully. Her eyes held something he couldn't name, an emotion that felt too mature, too heavy for someone so young. "Different isn't always a good thing, Lucas, but sometimes it is," he whispered. The air between them grew still, charged with a tension neither knew how to navigate. Ava broke the silence first. "You've been having nightmares." Lucas's blood turned cold. "How?" "You look tired," she said quickly, as if covering up a slip. "Your eyes. The way you flinch when someone touches your shoulder. People who sleep well don't flinch like that." He nodded slowly, though the explanation didn't settle the chill climbing his spine. She walked past him toward the hallway, but before she stepped out, she said one more thing. "Nightmares often mean your mind is trying to show you something." Lucas stood there long after she left, her words echoing through him like a whisper carried by the wind. Something inside him, something quiet, hidden, began to turn, as though her presence had stirred a truth he hadn't noticed was buried. Meanwhile, Charles watched the growing closeness between his son and the new cleaner with a caution he didn't voice aloud. He didn't distrust Ava, not exactly, but he did sense something he couldn't categorize, a shadow behind her eyes, a weight in the way she observed the house, familiarity in the way she walked through rooms that she should, by all logic, know nothing about. Then another unsettling event occurred. Late one night, Charles entered his office to find the door already open. He distinctly remembered locking it before going to dinner. Inside, the papers on his desk were spread out as though someone had been reading them. His private notes, financial documents, and, most disturbingly, an old photograph of Eleanor holding Lucas when he was a baby. Charles had placed that photo inside a drawer he rarely opened, yet now it lay centered on the desk, perfectly aligned with the edge, as though displayed intentionally. He rushed out into the hall and called for Mrs. Graham. She came immediately, her face pale as he questioned her. "No one has been in your office today, sir," she said firmly. "Not even me. Not even the new girl?" Charles pressed. Mrs. Graham shook her head. "Ava has not stepped inside this room since she started." "I would know." Charles didn't respond. He didn't know what terrified him more, the idea that someone was entering his office, or the faint but growing feeling that the presence inside the room wasn't someone at all. That same night, Lucas woke again around 3 a.m. The moonlight brushed across his room, illuminating the shadows on his walls. He sat up, heart pounding, certain he had heard something, a soft sound, almost like someone whispering, but when he strained to listen, the house returned to silence. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and froze. Someone had placed a folded blanket at the foot of his mattress, a blanket that wasn't there earlier, a blanket that didn't belong to his room. His breathing quickened. He walked toward the door, his hand trembling as he reached for the handle. But before he opened it, he saw a second detail, a faint smell lingering in the air. Lavender, the same scent Ava carried everywhere she went. Lucas pressed the back of his hand against his lips, torn between fear and curiosity. Was she checking on him? Or was something else happening? Something he couldn't yet wrap his mind around. Downstairs, Ava stood in the kitchen, her hands gripping the edge of the counter as she tried to steady her breathing. She shouldn't have gone upstairs, she told herself. Not yet. Not until she was sure. But every instinct, every piece of the truth she'd kept buried, was pushing her toward Lucas, because time was running out, and soon, the secret connecting her to the Whitmore family would not be something she could hide anymore. Not from Lucas, not from Charles, not from anyone. The atmosphere inside the Whitmore mansion grew heavier in the days that followed, as if every room, every corner, Every memory were slowly tightening around the people living there. Ava continued her routine silently, moving with the same grace and composure that had first caught Lucas's attention. But something in her behavior was changing. She had begun lingering longer in certain rooms, especially Lucas's, and sometimes paused outside Charles's office, listening to the quiet as if deciphering something only she could hear. Her eyes often drifted toward photographs, shelves, and locked drawers, and though she always pretended to be focused on cleaning, there was a sharpness behind her gaze, measured, searching, almost haunted. Lucas felt it long before he understood it. He could sense Ava pulling back emotionally, even as she seemed physically closer than ever. She avoided conversations that dipped too deeply, deflected questions with gentle but precise replies, and refused to let silence become anything more than silence. Yet every time she looked at Lucas, there was something pained in her expression, a kind of quiet conflict that didn't belong to someone who had simply taken a job in a stranger's home. He wanted to ask. He wanted to know. He wanted to understand what she carried inside her that made her eyes so impossibly sad. But something always stopped him. One late afternoon, as storm clouds hung heavy above the estate, Lucas found Ava in the old library. Dust particles glittered in the fading light, and she stood on a small stool reaching for a collection of books on the top shelf. Her presence in that room felt strange. Mrs. Graham rarely asked the cleaners to touch the library. "What are you doing here?" Lucas asked softly. Ava nearly lost her balance, startled. She climbed down quickly, brushing dust from her clothes. "I'm just organizing," she answered, but her voice sounded too tight, too careful. Lucas stepped closer, noticing a small leather-bound notebook on the table. It wasn't a library book. He'd seen it before. He was sure of it, but he couldn't immediately place where. Something about it tugged at the edges of his memory. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to the notebook. Ava's body tensed. For a split second, she didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. Then she casually slid the notebook under a small stack of books. "Just something Mrs. Graham said needed sorting," she replied. But the lie was so thin Lucas felt it as surely as a slap. He walked toward the table, eyes fixed on the stack. "Why are you lying to me?" Ava's breath hitched. She looked at him with an expression that seemed to crack her calm facade. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could answer, thunder rolled across the sky, rattling the windows. Lucas took another step. "You know things. Things about me, about my dad, about this house. You show up in places you're not supposed to be. You say things you shouldn't know. You—" He paused, his voice shaking. "Who are you really?" Ava's eyes glistened with a deep, aching sadness, and for a moment Lucas thought she might finally say something true, something real. But instead she whispered, "I can't tell you. Not yet." Lucas felt the ground shift beneath him. "Why? What are you hiding?" Ava shook her head, taking a step back, her voice trembling. "If I tell you now, it will destroy everything, and I'm not ready for that. You're not ready." Her words stung more than he expected. The coldness in her tone wasn't aimed at him. It was aimed at herself, a kind of self-punishment, a kind of guilt. He wanted to push her, to demand answers, to force the truth out of her, but the raw vulnerability in her expression held him back. She looked like someone teetering on the edge of a precipice, afraid of what would happen if she fell, or if she didn't. Before he could reply, they both heard footsteps approaching rapidly. Charles appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with frustration and something close to fear. "Lucas," he said sharply, "I need to speak with you, now." Lucas looked at Ava one last time, then reluctantly followed his father out. Ava remained frozen in place, breathing heavily, her hands trembling as she lowered herself into one of the library chairs. She pressed a palm to her forehead, as if fighting back a wave of emotions too strong to contain. Down the hall, Charles led Lucas into his office and shut the door firmly. "I don't want you spending so much time with that girl," Charles said, his voice shaking slightly. Lucas blinked in disbelief. "What? Why? She hasn't done anything wrong." "That's not the point," Charles snapped. He paused, pressing his fingers to the bridge of his nose in exhausted frustration. "Lucas, things are happening in this house. Things you're too young to understand." Lucas scoffed. "Oh, please, don't treat me like a child." "I'm not," Charles said sharply. "I'm treating you like someone I need to protect." Something in Lucas stilled. He had never heard his father speak with such urgency, such desperation. "What are you afraid of?" he whispered. Charles hesitated. Then he walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and retrieved the old leather-bound notebook Lucas had seen earlier. His breath caught. That was the same notebook Ava had been trying to hide. Charles placed it on the desk, pushing it toward him. "This," he said quietly, "is your mother's handwriting. These are her private notes. She kept them hidden, and someone has been moving them around the house." Lucas felt his heart plummet. "Are you saying Ava?" "I don't know what I'm saying," Charles snapped, his voice tight with fear he could no longer hide. "But this girl, she knows too much. She appears at the strangest times, and she's been near these notes. Notes your mother never let anyone touch, not even me." Lucas swallowed hard, staring at the notebook as dread coiled inside him. "She's involved in something, Lucas," Charles whispered. "Something she shouldn't be." In the library, Ava stood from her chair and walked slowly toward the window. Rain began to fall, streaking the glass like tears. She whispered to the empty room, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, but I wasn't supposed to come back here. Not like this." Lightning illuminated her reflection. Her eyes filled with torment, fear, and love. Love she wasn't allowed to feel. Love that could ruin everything. But the truth, her truth, still remained in the shadows. The following days in the mansion unfolded with a strange mixture of routine and undercurrent tension that only Ethan seemed fully aware of. Mariah continued doing her chores with quiet dedication, but something in her eyes, something she once hid flawlessly, started surfacing little by little. Sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, she wandered into the long hallway filled with portraits of Ethan's family, standing silently in front of them as if searching for something, or perhaps someone. And Ethan noticed it every single time. One late afternoon, as the dying sunlight spilled through the tall windows, Ethan caught her again lingering near his mother's portrait, the same portrait he had avoided since her death 20 days earlier. Mariah didn't touch the frame. She simply stared with a seriousness that didn't match the expression of someone admiring art. Ethan felt a chill, not of fear, but of a strange intuition that Mariah knew something she hadn't yet said. He approached quietly, and Mariah, startled, instinctively stepped back as though she had been caught trespassing. Ethan reassured her gently, but she trembled slightly, clutching the cleaning cloth with white knuckles. When he asked if she was okay, she forced a smile, a fragile one that cracked at the edges. For a moment, Ethan wondered whether she had been crying before he arrived. Later that night, Ethan sat, alone in the library, surrounded by books. He didn't feel like reading. His mind kept wandering to Mariah's reactions, her expressions, the way her voice softened whenever she said his mother's name. She had mentioned only briefly that she used to work in a small care home before taking the job in the mansion. But now he questioned how much she truly knew, or how deeply she had been connected to the world his mother lived in. Unable to sleep, Ethan headed to the kitchen to get a glass of water, only to find Mariah already there, standing motionless at the counter with her hands gripping its edge as though she was trying not to collapse. Her shoulders shook from silent sobs she tried to suppress. When she realized he was there, she immediately wiped her face and tried to straighten herself, but Ethan had already seen everything. He approached slowly, not wanting to scare her or force her into an explanation she wasn't ready to give, but to his surprise, she whispered an apology. Not for crying, but for not telling him sooner. Those words froze him. Mariah grew quiet again, as if regretting the confession instantly. Ethan gently insisted that she could trust him, but her eyes filled with fear rather than relief. She said that some truths could destroy everything if revealed too quickly, and that sentence alone filled Ethan with a deep unease. Just as he tried to comfort her, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, heavy, unfamiliar. Mariah stiffened. Instantly, all color draining from her face. Ethan whispered that it must be one of the night guards, but Mariah shook her head with such certainty that his stomach tightened. Whoever or whatever was approaching didn't belong to the mansion's routine. The footsteps stopped right outside the kitchen door. Ethan glanced toward the entrance, expecting someone to appear, but no one did. Silence swallowed the room again. Mariah grabbed Ethan's hand tightly, surprising him with the urgency of her grip. Her voice trembled as she told him that the mansion wasn't as safe as he believed, that his mother's death had not been the accident he was told it was. Ethan's pulse quickened, and for a moment, he felt the whole world tilt beneath him. But just as he pressed her for answers, Mariah backed away again, insisting she couldn't speak further, not yet, not until she was sure they were alone and no one could hear. She walked away, leaving Ethan standing in the moonlit kitchen, shaken by the implication that everything he believed about his mother, his father, and even the very walls around him might have been built on a lie, and the person who seemed to know the truth was the same young woman who had walked into their lives only days after tragedy struck, a woman who was now terrified of something, or someone, lurking in the shadows of the mansion. For the next 3 days, Ethan felt trapped inside his own home, every hallway echoing differently, every room holding a kind of tension. That made him question whether he had ever truly known the mansion at all. The staff went about their duties normally, but Ethan noticed something unusual. Whenever Mariah entered a room, conversation stopped, people looked away, and when she left, whispers returned, carried through the corridors like secrets trying to escape the walls. He tried to ask them what they knew, but most offered only vague excuses or nervous glances over their shoulders. It became painfully clear that Mariah wasn't the only one keeping something from him. Everyone else was too. One evening, Ethan went to his father's office to confront him about everything he suspected, but was met with a locked door. That alone was strange. His father had always kept the office open, believing secrecy bred paranoia. Now the rule seemed reversed. Ethan knocked, waited, knocked again. No response. But he could hear movement inside, slow, deliberate pacing, and then the sound of something heavy being slid across the floor. A drawer? A safe? When Ethan called out his father's name, the noise stopped abruptly. A long silence followed before his father's voice finally responded. Distant, strained, nothing like the steady, authoritative tone Ethan was used to. He said he was busy. He said they would talk later. But there was something else in his voice. Something cracked. Ethan pressed his ear to the door, but his father fell completely silent, as if he had vanished from the room entirely. That night, Ethan found Mariah sitting alone in the garden under the dim garden lamps, staring at the old fountain that had not worked since his mother's death. Mariah didn't look surprised to see him. In fact, she looked like she had been waiting for him to come. Ethan sat beside her quietly. For a long while, neither spoke. Finally, Mariah exhaled a trembling breath and told him that she had once known someone who lived inside this mansion, someone who trusted her deeply. Ethan's heart lurched, knowing exactly who she meant, without her saying the name. Mariah described Ethan's mother not as a fragile woman who died suddenly, but as someone who had confided in her during the last months, someone who felt watched, followed, and betrayed from within her own home. She spoke about nights when Ethan's mother couldn't sleep, when she heard footsteps outside her room long after everyone else was in bed. She spoke of warnings she wanted to give her son, but never found the courage to deliver, believing she had more time. When Ethan asked why his mother never told him any of this, Mariah lowered her gaze. She said softly that sometimes a parent chooses silence to protect their child from a truth they're not ready to face. Ethan felt those words like a knife, but then Mariah admitted something even more unsettling, something that made Ethan's chest tighten. His mother had suspected that her death was approaching. She had even prepared a message for Ethan, hidden somewhere inside the mansion. A message Mariah had promised to deliver, one she had sworn to keep safe even after Ethan's mother passed. Ethan felt the cold night air mix with a deeper chill, the fear that everything he knew was about to unravel. But Mariah didn't stop there. She revealed that she hadn't come to the mansion by coincidence or because she needed a job. She had come because Ethan's mother had asked her to. Her arrival 20 days after the death was not a random timing. It was intentional. Ethan stared at her, stunned, realizing he had misjudged everything about her presence. He asked what the message said, desperate now, but Mariah shook her head. She explained that the message was hidden in a place his mother believed only Ethan could find, somewhere meaningful, somewhere personal, somewhere tied to a memory only mother and son shared. Mariah didn't know the location, only the instructions. The more she explained, the more Ethan understood. His mother had trusted Mariah with something too dangerous to leave to anyone else, and Mariah had been carrying that weight ever since. Before Ethan could question her further, a bright light flashed across the garden, blinding them both momentarily. A figure stood near the mansion's back door, someone tall, rigid, watching them. The light vanished just as quickly as it appeared, leaving only a dark silhouette behind. The moment Ethan stood up, the figure disappeared into the shadows. Mariah grabbed his arm, her fear palpable. She whispered urgently that time was running out, that whatever his mother feared had already begun, and that the mansion was no longer safe for either of them until the truth was uncovered. Ethan looked back at the dark windows of the mansion, his home, his childhood, the place he thought he understood, but now it felt like a labyrinth of secrets, each corner holding pieces of a puzzle his mother left behind, and somewhere inside it, a message waited, a message capable of turning everything upside down. The following morning arrived heavy and slow, as if the entire mansion were holding its breath. Ethan had barely slept. The shadows in his room seemed to move differently, leaning in on him, reminding him of the figure he and Mariah saw in the garden. The memory of that silhouette pressed against his mind like a warning he couldn't ignore. When Ethan joined Mariah in the kitchen, she was already waiting for him. Her nerves were visible, hands trembling slightly, eyes scanning every corner. Before he could speak, she told him she had remembered something his mother had once told her. The truth hides where love resides. Ethan's heart pounded. He had heard that phrase before, years earlier, when his mother explained that the safest secrets were those hidden in places full of meaning. Together they made their way through the mansion, searching for anything that felt personal, symbolic, or tied to Ethan's childhood. They checked his mother's old studio, the small balcony she loved, the music room where she used to play piano. Nothing. Hours passed. Ethan grew frustrated, feeling as though time was slipping through his fingers. Then Mariah gently asked him the question no one else had considered. Where did you feel most connected to your mother before any of this pain existed? The answer came to Ethan instantly. He led her to the attic, dusty, quiet, untouched for years. As a child, he and his mother used to build little hideouts from old furniture and sheets, pretending the attic was a castle, a ship, or a world of their own. His mother would always say that imagination created the safest places. When they reached the attic door, Ethan noticed something he had never seen before. A faint scratch on the wood, almost like a symbol. Mariah traced it with her finger, and in a trembling voice said she recognized it. It was a mark his mother used when hiding things she didn't want anyone else to move. A caret symbol, tilted sideways. Ethan slowly pushed the door open. The attic smelled of old books and time-worn memories. Dust particles floated in rays of sunlight, breaking through the small window. For a moment, Ethan felt like he was 8 years old again, waiting for his mother's voice to guide him through a made-up adventure. He walked to an old trunk, one he remembered clearly. As a child, he thought it held treasure. Now, he hoped it still did. When he opened it, his breath caught. Inside, beneath folded blankets and old photo albums, there was a sealed envelope with his name on it. Ethan. His hands shook as he lifted it. Mariah stood beside him, silent, knowing this moment belonged to him alone. He broke the seal slowly, unfolding the letter written in his mother's unmistakably elegant handwriting. The message began with love, raw, honest love. She apologized for the secrets she had been forced to keep, confessed her fears that someone inside the mansion was conspiring against her, and revealed that she had discovered irregularities in his father's company and evidence that someone close to the family was involved in something dangerous, something that threatened not only her life, but Ethan's as well. Ethan felt his chest tighten as he continued reading. She explained that she trusted only 2 people. Mariah, a kind soul who had once worked at the care home where she volunteered, and Ethan himself. She had asked Mariah, months before her death, to protect him if anything happened to her. She had left instructions for Mariah to return to the mansion only when the danger resurfaced, when Ethan seemed truly at risk. Then the letter shifted. She wrote that she feared her sudden death was not natural. She had overheard conversations late at night. She had seen documents she wasn't meant to see. She believed someone wanted her gone because she knew too much. She wrote that she had tried to warn Ethan's father, but he refused to believe her, or refused to listen. As Ethan reached the final lines, his pulse quickened. His mother wrote that the person she feared most was not a stranger. It was someone inside the family, someone with access, someone who had grown desperate. Ethan's breath faltered, and he reread the last sentence twice, unable to believe the truth staring back at him. Ethan, if you are reading this, it means the one responsible was closer than you ever imagined. It was not an outsider. It was your uncle. His vision blurred for a moment. His uncle, his father's brother, who often visited the mansion, who managed finances, who always, claimed to help the family in times of crisis. The same uncle who had suddenly stopped coming to the mansion after his mother's death. The same uncle who had been pressing Ethan's father to sign over certain assets. Mariah placed a hand on Ethan's arm as he lowered the letter, shaking. Before they could speak, footsteps echoed in the hallway below the attic. Heavy, steady, purposeful. Ethan froze. Mariah's eyes widened with terror. She recognized that rhythm of steps. The attic door creaked. Then it opened. And there, standing in the dim light, was Ethan's uncle, his expression calm. Too calm. He stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. He said he had hoped Ethan wouldn't find the letter, that it would remain buried forever. He confessed without shame that Ethan's mother had uncovered financial crimes he was involved in. He admitted she confronted him, and that she never made it to the hospital alive because he made sure she didn't. Ethan felt a rage he had never known, a cold, focused fury. He stood between Mariah and his uncle instinctively, but before his uncle could take another step, another figure appeared in the doorway, Ethan's father. He looked exhausted, broken, and holding a phone already connected to the police. He had overheard everything. For years, he had suspected something was wrong, but he had never imagined his own brother was capable of such betrayal. The weight on his face revealed that the guilt of not believing his wife had tormented him since the day she died. Within minutes, the mansion filled with police officers. Ethan's uncle tried to escape, but it was useless. He was arrested on the spot. As he was taken away, he glared at Mariah, not with hatred, but with recognition. He knew she had been the missing piece, the one person who had returned to protect the truth. When the house finally fell silent again, Ethan's father approached Mariah. He thanked her with tears in his eyes, acknowledging that she had risked everything to honor his wife's last wish. But Ethan simply embraced her. A long, quiet embrace, the kind that binds two lives that survived something together. In the days that followed, the mansion didn't feel haunted anymore. Not by shadows, not by secrets. Ethan read his mother's letter 100 times, each time finding strength in her words rather than pain. His father began repairing the broken parts of their lives, and Mariah stayed, not as a housekeeper, but as someone who had become impossible for Ethan to imagine living without. The truth had been devastating, but it had freed them, and the message his mother left behind, the one hidden in the attic, did exactly what she intended. It saved her son forever.